if you've got a modeler, what is the point in having pedals? This was basically a conversation that I had with my buddy Jake, or started having it. Maybe he had his half of it. I didn't even respond. In a group chat that I have with Jake and Jason and Joanne, and in this chat we talk about all sorts of stuff and gear and bits and pieces. So Jason kind of is a modeler guy because of where he lives. Using real amps at any kind of volume is not really a thing. So he's a guy who's got Kemper, Helix Native, Fractal stuff as well. I think he's still got the Fractal stuff, don't you? And so he's also really into quite a lot of pedals. And Jake kind of said, isn't it a bit pointless kind of having these pedals when they're all going into a modeler? So I just wanted to kind of explore reasons why maybe you might still want pedals when you're going into a modeler. So I'm definitely someone who's using modeling stuff more than not. When it comes to this sort of stuff, I think there are a few reasons why you might still want to hold on to the actual drive pedals. So the first thing is that I think it's actually quite a different workflow working with a drive pedal, and in terms of actually staying in the zone, staying in some sort of flow state, or just having something that can connect you back to kind of the traditional style of guitar pedals and stuff like that, because Jason is a guy that's going to have grown up, I'd imagine, playing with amps and bits and pieces like that, right? And this can kind of give you one small part of your rig that maybe helps connect back to things that you're more familiar with. So there's kind of that element to it, as well as, you know, you're not going to have to dip into a menu to turn on or off your drive. It's also quite a useful way to just have an additional sort of gain stage that is there to be switched in or out. It doesn't have to kind of change your preset, whatever you're on. So there is kind of these workflow elements to it, as well as nostalgia elements to it, that I think are worth keeping hold of. There is also this idea for me, so I've just looked at some of the pedals that I've got, so I guess this is going to be one of the best ways to talk about this. So for instance, in the Helix, there is no Boss blues driver. So, you know, if I want a blues driver tone and I'm in the Helix world, I still need a real blues driver. And there aren't really many pedals out there that sound particularly like a blues driver. It's quite a specific thing. It's a Fender tone stack, essentially, with the bass and treble up full or something like that, and the mids down. It was something a little bit crazy like that between two clipping stages. It was something like how it started. Similarly, the Boss OD3 isn't in there. So if these are things that make up your tones, then, you know, another pedal that I really like, it is in the Fractal world, the Marshall Blues Breaker. They reissued it. There's nothing exactly like this in the Helix world. There is the Prince of Tone, which is a modified version of the Blues Breaker, but I don't think it actually ends up sounding quite like the Blues Breaker. This is one of those pedals that I think just sounds amazing and does a really specific thing if you think about sort of thick John Mayer Clapton-y sort of stuff. It's great for that. So there's just 3 pedals that are on the shelf that don't exist there. We're talking about tube screamers, you know, the Metal Screamer, the TS10. There are different versions of a tube screamer that aren't really in any modeling device, and how different they are to one another in real life is kind of debatable, but certainly, you know, when you've got a few tube screamers, you try them side by side, you notice there are subtle differences, and if you've got something that you really like the sound of, then stick with your original pedal potentially. Just wanted to give a shout out to TrueFire, who sponsor this channel and make it possible for me to buy nappies for the kid. You can use the code JNC40 to get 40% of any course on TrueFire. If you're looking for a specific recommendation, I really rate the Tim Miller Creative Arpeggio Design course. In terms of how, like, an expert tuition guy and amazing improviser, amazing player, kind of thinks about some of the geometrical aspects of the guitar and uses that to kind of inform his playing and kind of get more out of like a simple approach that doesn't actually sound simple when you start using it. As well as all the other great stuff on there from folks like Andy Timmons, Andy Wood. I've just seen Larry Carlton's actually got a bunch of courses on there, Robin Ford. You can use the code JNC100 to get $100 off of their All Access Pass, which is how you can access everything on there and kind of dip in and out of it, use it for inspiration in that way. Thanks to TrueFire. On that Prince of Tone point, so there are some designs which are like designed to be kind of improvements of the original pedals that some people end up using, right? So like the King of Tone, like the Prince of Tone, or, you know, more recently I got sent the Rattler by Iliasat Jam Pedals, and this is, you know, a souped up version of a Rat pedal. So if you're someone who is using sort of versions of these pedals, so it could be like Keeley blues drivers and all that sort of stuff, then you're probably not going to be catered to in the modeling world. It might even be close, the models that they got in there. I think there's a part of this guitar stuff where even having something that we think is going to sound better does actually end up sounding better when you put it into the soup of playing and hands and all that sort of stuff. One particular area that I think you're not going to give up your pedals, no matter how into modeling you are, it would be fuzz. And I think fuzz is probably one of the things that a lot of us might agree works better in the analog world. I think I'm one of those chaps, and I'm sure some of you guys are as well. I know Jason is big into his fuzz pedals, so, you know, if you're really into fuzz, then keeping a fuzz pedal around, even if you've got modeler, makes sense to me as well. Another area that I think is a little bit more out there, but it's the idea of combining drive pedals, which for some reason in the modeling world I'd be slightly less inclined to do. Whereas the first thing that I do on my real pedal boards is kind of see how these things interact when you're stacking them, and that's something to kind of think about, I guess. You know, experimentation with real pedals might end up being something a little bit different to what you do in real life. And then there is this other point, which is that, and I'll demonstrate this for you, that sometimes the models can be kind of flat out bad compared to the real thing. So there is some of these things which I think I've done some comparisons with, like the Klon and a Klon KTR. I've done some comparisons with, you know, various bits and pieces, and I feel like there are some things that modellers get quite right, and you know, varying degrees of accuracy depending on how old a circuit is and how new the thing I've got is, or you know, different versions of the same pedal are going to have like subtle differences. But sometimes the algorithms kind of just don't sound very good, and they might have come from 20 years back. I think specifically the Dimension is a good example of this, where I thought, you know, I'd do a comparison with them, and it just turns out that compared to this, the Helix version just sounds kind of a bit crap. If you've got something that you really like the sound of, then probably the modelling version of it in some cases is just not going to do a good enough job if you really know the tone of it, if you really appreciate it. I think a lot of the modelling stuff concentrates on the amp modelling side of stuff, and that's an area where again it's quite difficult to do a comparison knowing that they model off of one specific amplifier. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are pedals pointless if you're using a modeler? I think for me the answer is no. I don't know, you see so many people kind of disappointed with how the Helix Drive sounds that maybe there is something to just using real drive pedals with your Helix, and maybe you would be happier. I don't know, let me know your thoughts in the comments. But those are just some reasons that I feel like pedals still make sense, you know, because there's so much in the pedal world. It's quite a rich kind of little ecosystem, and even if you grant that maybe through modelers you don't hear as much nuance as you do through a real Fender amplifier at some sort of volume, you still do notice a difference, I think.